selling, if you, say, installed a 20 kilowatt system for your house because that was sort of what the maximum you think you would use for your own personal use, if you only were using 10 kilowatt, you could sell the excess back, but the sole purpose of you having it is not to make money. So it's not a commercial venture.
Okay.
So you could still net meter, but you're not doing it to make a profit for yourself. You're just doing it because sometimes you're not going to use all that energy, so you are able to sell it back. If that makes sense.
It does, but if I had more available good roof space than someone else in town, I guess I feel like wherever we have capacity for rooftop, we shouldn't be discouraging it because it's helping.
That would be community solar. That would fall under the community solar category. So if you're not using it just for your own personal use, and whether you're selling it back or allow for your neighbors to, that would fall under community solar. Is the group, is the net metering, group net metering that is benefiting people within the city of Concord.
Can I clarify? So if you had a rooftop with a lot of extra space, and say you're a business and you want to use a certain amount for your business, say you need, I don't know, 500 kilowatts is the thing, right, for your business, but you're actually you're able to fit 1 megawatt or something on your roof, that would be determined a commercial installation. Craig, it would be, right?
Or it could be community or commercial.
Right. If it was community, then it would be different, but we would regard it, if it was something that is clearly for profit, it doesn't become accessory anymore. Then Craig would actually probably determine that a secondary primary use of the site for that. So that probably wouldn't come before them if it was
for
a rooftop.
It would not come before.
So really, what a lot of this focuses on is on the ground mounted. So if you're installing 5 acres of your property, for instance, out in some rural area, that would be considered that you're selling back to the grid. Right. That would be considered commercial solar. So that's.
But I think the net metering question, and my understanding of net metering is just one house, you use a third of what or 2/3 of what you generate, and you sell back through the net metering process to the grid, and roll the meter back. Is that how it would work?
If I may, I think when you net meter, you're selling it back to the utility.
To the utility, yeah.
As opposed to selling it to other people.
To other people as a member of the community piece.
Right. There's net metering, and then there's group net metering.
Yeah.
So group net metering is you're selling back to a certain specific group.
I mean, just visually, I remember I was at the meeting in October, and the community solar project that they showed, I think it was in Milford or Amherst or somewhere, and it was a gigantic.
I'll show that later.
Okay,
yep.
A gigantic parcel, and then there was X amount of houses all out of view of the overhead view. That was community, and everybody used it internally in that community. That's not net metering in that case. So you're not.
It's group net metering.
It's group net metering. Okay.
The RSAs are fun to read. Yes.
Okay.
Question, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you. You mentioned briefly, and I know you're halfway through or partway through anyway, so I don't want to relate. But I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was very comfortable. My understanding is that the battery technology, and in fact, this came through at a session for planning boards that I went to earlier this year, that battery technology is advancing fairly rapidly. I noticed that recently it was publicized that Liberty Utilities in another community, I think maybe here in New Hampshire, Lebanon perhaps, was in fact offering a deal on household batteries that would actually be able to store the excess power or download it from the grid during low capacity, during low cost periods, like at night during the summer, that could then be reused or, by your house at peak capacity periods. So maybe this is too much of a philosophical question, but is it logical to assume that net metering eventually may kind of be phased out because, in fact, you'll be able to keep that excess capacity, save it until you need it?
It's possible, yeah. The hard part of doing this is technology is constantly changing. And even as, back in August when recommendations were submitted to us. There's new information now that, again, is changing some things that we're talking about. So I think the solar revisions are going to be constantly changing as we move forward.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So these were some of the images that we were showing at the public meetings to get across existing residential installations, and the DMV has installations on the roof there. But there's a lot of discussion about using carports, which would be pretty much looked at as structures. So they would fall under structures, and it could just be a building permit to do the carports. We've heard feedback that those are cost prohibitive at this point, but moving forward, it may not be. But those are the types of installations that we would support moving forward and hopefully be able to incentivize to use. These large parking lots are already impervious surfaces, like at the mall or anywhere that we have large parking structures, and maybe incentivize that through the site plan process as far as requiring those. These are some of the smaller scale installations that are used for on-site consumption. So the UU Church on Pleasant Street, which you all saw 2 years ago come before you, and then the Brochu nurseries, which you see when you're driving up 93. And that did not trigger any site plan review, so it was a smaller scale on-site, and that was just all dealt with through building and electric.
I have a question about the UU Church installation. I know when we heard that, the concern, I don't know if it was from abutters or passersby, was it being located in the front of the church? And in the proposed revisions to the zoning ordinance, you're proposing to place these to the rear or to the side. Has there been any, what is the update sort of on this installation, sort of as it pertains to people objecting to it? In relation to what you're proposing here.
Yeah, we've had a lot of discussion with it, with the committee about this, and they support keeping it in the side and the rear yard unless you are not able. So the UU Church was not able to site it anywhere else in their property. So they got a variance, and that was the hardship that they had shown. What we are proposing is doing that through the conditional use process. So it wouldn't be through the CUP process. So it wouldn't go to zoning. It would come to the planning board for it kind of leaving zoning to make the decisions about screening and buffering, which they had to do in this instance, and they required those buffers that may have been a financial hardship for the UU Church. It never came before the planning board to make those decisions. That decision was tacked on to the variance. So we think by doing it through the planning board process, there's a little more flexibility for the planning board to establish what buffers should be. But we did hear from some people at the public meetings that said put it anywhere, but I think the feedback we've gotten and discussions we've had with zoning and with the environment committee and amongst ourselves is to keep it in the side and the rear of the property as any accessory structure would be, so it's no different than a shed or anything else that you would have to have in the side or the rear of your property, but do allow that flexibility that they can put it in the front if they have a hardship and can't put it anywhere else.
Could clearing trees be a hardship if those are to the rear of the property?
Potentially, yes. Yep, and I think that the UU Church had that, because there's the balance of why are we requiring removing carbon sinks to put a renewable energy system up if,
Carbon sinks.
Carbon sinks.
Yeah, just the Unitarian.
Carbon
Carbon sinks. The Unitarian Church, and I remember when it came through, and I was concerned that it was a blight on the front of the building, and I was pretty vocal and I did not want it, but I recognized that putting screening in front obviously causes problems with screening the sun. I gotta say, you don't even see it when you drive by it. It's nothing even remotely. It doesn't draw your eye to it. It doesn't shine in your eyes. It doesn't reflect the sun in your eyes. All of those things that went through my mind, and I did mention a couple of them at the meeting. It looks great. So
they had the unfortunate task of being the first ones.
Yeah, and they felt it, I think, too. I mean, we had a lot of questions for them and a lot of concerns, and I know the screening and the buffering is still going to be a concern with any of them. So.
Correct. Yep, and that's a good example of topography plays a role. So it's not just about landscaping, and we've added that within our screening and buffering is talking about topography because it's a little higher up, so you're looking almost over it. So the landform kind of plays a role in that.
So skipping gears, ground mounted, how does this impervious surface question get resolved.
You're
Is that-
jumping ahead, Rich.
I know, I'm okay, I'm sorry.
We're waiting for that.
Look at all the beautiful pictures
Slides,
and the sheep.
You preempted me too.
sorry. Continue,
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
So these are just sort of kind of showing people examples of what you could potentially see with some of these installations. The co-location of agriculture, these are great examples, and the requirement of doing pollinator habitat plantings, which is sort of the meadow plantings and the wildflowers. And that was something that we talked about where before the city had the RFP to do the solar installation at Hall Street. That was one of the sort of pushes that we had, was to plant pollinator habitat. So at least you have some beneficial use of that land that is beneath the solar panels. And these are just other examples of what you can expect to see for different installations. These are other municipal properties. Peterborough did the installation of the 1 megawatt facility at their wastewater lagoon. Lee, well, it was funded in its energy for Durham, but it's actually located in Lee. This was in an old gravel pit. So these are examples of sort of marginal lands that we may want to incentivize and kind of push to have solar installations put on properties like this.
So is the Peterborough one over water?
I don't know what a sewer lagoon is.
It's adjacent to the water. Okay.
Is it? Yeah. And then this currently is the largest operational facility, and that's in Molten Borough. It's a 2 megawatt facility, but now there's a lot larger ones coming on board in the next year or so under construction. And then this is the community solar image that I showed at that presentation. So this is in Hollis.
So can you explain to me how that works? So again, in a Concord scenario where you've got an existing development of houses already done, somebody's got a large tract of land like that. And
Right.
they want to do solar at a bigger scale.
Yep. So that would have to have some legal agreements and working with the utility to show that that energy is being sold and used by people within that service area.
So there's nothing to do with us. That was my point. So there's some type of legal agreement, that, like a condo association type thing, where they agree to participate, put money in to develop, and take power from it back as a compensation. So
Right, yeah, I'm not
there's
sure what the
nothing to
agreements
do-
look like.
There's nothing, we don't have anything to do with that, right?
No, but the only thing that we're kind of pointing these out is we want to incentivize community solar. That'll help us meet our goals. So we are changing what lot coverage requirements are and allowing a little more flexibility for community solar, just so that we can have these types of installations, because there's a lot of properties that are not suitable for solar at all. So they want to be able to, if we want to meet this 100% renewable energy goal for private citizens, you can't just rely on everybody self-producing. You have to have something like this in
So
order for them to
just-
buy in.
And just so we're clear, I think the 100% for the city isn't specifically that we're going to see solar arrays and city property generating their own power. It's that the city's going to be buying it from solar. Is that right or no?
Nope, it's, there will be an RFP coming out in the next couple months to put solar installations at the landfill.
Yep.
We're trying again for the wastewater treatment and the water treatment facilities on Hutchins Street
So
and Hall
the
Street.
2030 incentive is that the city of Concord will generate solar power to power itself and
Itself.
not buying it from the grid for people that are creating it, right?
Right, there's that caveat in case we can't meet
Oh, yeah.
the space goals, that they would buy local. Right now, the city purchases renewable energy credits for wind from the Midwest.
Right.
However, that's not, that could change at any point in time. So the goal is to either self-produce within the city or purchase from local. So whether we're buying it from Hopkinton or from an offshore facility that's going in off of the coast of New Hampshire,
Okay.
or something like that.
Okay.
So this is where we get to the meaty stuff. What's the answer? So I think the RO and the RM districts are the most difficult. They have the most open land that is ripe for picking for installations to come along, whether they're large fields or just larger lots that are easier and more financially feasible for a developer to come in, as opposed to a brownfield, which may require, or even the landfill, requires a little more financial investment in order to develop for solar. So the RO and the RM districts have more greenfield sites that are easier to develop for financial reasons. So we're looking at increasing setbacks to 50 feet for the RO and the RM districts for front, side, and rear. It's the RO right now front and rear is 50 feet, and the side is 40 feet. So it's not a huge difference for RO, but the RM is 15 and 25 feet, so that'll be a little bit larger of a setback for the RM district. Using existing vegetation and topography for screening and requiring supplemental screening at the discretion of the planning board. And we've contemplated putting in sort of like a menu of buffers that could be utilized, which we have right now for different buffer selections, whether it's a fence with a mix of shrubs or trees and shrubs. And I think it's going to be different for every site. We don't want a hedgerow put up. We'd prefer naturalized plantings, or it may not even be visible just based on the topography. So we want to allow that flexibility through the planning board process.
So, sorry, so give me I'm pulling away from the mic now. So the increasing of the RO and the RM setbacks, you said the RM is 15 and 20?
25 feet and 15 for the side.
And we're going to increase it to 50 feet. So, okay, and then RO, you said it was 40 and 50 now anyways. What's the additional 30-foot? Is that just I mean, what, I hate, you know, I like specificity, but I know you probably want it there just in case. Is that the
Yeah, that's sort of every site is different, and it's, so if
it was coming down a hill or something and it was looking right in somebody's, I mean, you've got to have a little bit of flexibility, right? Is that what you're
Exactly.
saying? Okay.
Yes, yep.
Oh, yes, Baron.
Thank you. I need to be up front, so I'm in your...
You do, in your visual, just throw
Thank you.
something at me.
Beth, just for clarification, the increased setbacks are only for solar projects, right?
Correct, yes. Ground mounted.
Ground
solar
mounted
projects,
solar.
yes.
Ground mounted, yes, I'm sorry, thank you.
I don't know if you were going to get to it, but just since we were talking about it, the logic behind the additional 30 feet was, you know, you may have a meadow over there right now, and as you're driving down the road, a meadow is part of your view shed. And so do we want to say, now we're going to change that to a 50 feet buffer of trees, which is going to change the character? Or do we want to say, you know what, keep meadow for 50 feet?
Another 30
and then
feet.
we want an extra 30 feet to back there, put some large shrubs or something like that, that kind of blends with other things, you know, back in that direction along the frontage. So it was, I mean, we were thinking about topography, we were thinking about view sheds and vistas, and, you know, we obviously, I mean, there were some recommendations, it should be 200 feet back, you know, just to preserve the scenic experience if there's a farmland next to you. Now it's not going to be farmland. So it was kind of a balance in terms of understanding all the different types of rural character that we're trying to be compatible with. So that's where that 30 feet, extra 30 feet comes
Well, and
from.
I asked the question I kind of stopped myself, but on the guise of the development community wanting some understanding when they bring forward a project, we're not going to say, well, that's what it says there, but we really want to add another 30 feet to it, and you're going to have to push this back, and the pool's not going to go over there. I mean, that's my concern, is we're a little too wishy in that area, but I understand the reasoning behind it, but looking at it from the development side, I understand that they're going to want, I can do it here, and here's how I situate it, and here's how I put it on the property, and then we come in and say, well, we don't want it that way, we want it this way, and I know that doesn't go over well, usually.
Yeah, this one is going to, I think, require more of a conceptual discussion with any developer that comes through from the beginning, just to sort of start to clarify those points.
I can also speak to that.
Everything
knowing-
I say, I
No,
can speak to it. Good,
no.
that's good, and I'll ask
Well,
the questions, you got the answers.
Understanding that in the
I'm
RO and the RM districts, our recommendations, which we're going to talk about later for the amount of coverage, are going to be much less than the actual land area of the parcel. So for instance, if you have 50 acres, you know, maybe you're only allowed to put solar on 5 of them or 20 of them. So if it's critical that this really is the only place we can put them, you know, I think that becomes part of the conversation, the conditional use permit process. But if it's like, well, we can only have a certain amount of space, so if we provide this extra 30 feet,
Right.
we can still just move what we're allowed to have back further. So I think thinking about how complicated it all could be with each specific site is why we're trying to build so much flexibility in.
Yeah, and I think solar developers, I think, understand that every site is different, and it requires a lot more discussion, because it's a very different look for these properties than what we currently see.
And some of the model ordinance that they gave us said 100 feet.
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yeah,
Recommendations.
for rural districts, 100-foot setbacks was a recommendation in some municipalities.
Yeah, and again, I think that was one of my points that I was going to make in the October meeting. I just didn't feel comfortable making it, but I just don't want to see a single standalone ground-mounted solar panel in the middle of Auburn Street as I'm driving up the street that happens to be 40 feet away from one boundary, 30 feet, whatever it is, that it's the only spot that it can be is next to the side. That's what I want to have. I don't want to see that. And obviously, it's going to be no front lawns, which is great, but, okay. So it'll be a work in progress, I guess.
Yes, yes, it is. So I forgot to mention that we have based a lot of our recommendations. The New Hampshire Sustainable Energy Association came up with a model ordinance that's been supported and put out by the New Hampshire Municipal Association. So we use that for a lot of definitions and guiding changes. And then also I've looked at a lot of model ordinances from New England and other sort of rural areas, municipalities that have rural districts like we do, to try to start to resolve some of these issues.
So let me ask a question. Are we on the front edge of this, or the middle of it, or behind it so far that we can take advantage of everybody else already have doing it?
No, I don't think we're behind it.
Okay.
I think we're not, we're sort of near the front. We're edging in the front group.
I mean, you see the Molten Borough with the big developments and the other places with the big developments. We don't have a lot of that type of property, I guess, and that at some point that inhibits some of it, but.
Yeah, we could have been there a couple years ago with the Hall Street installation, because that would have been the size of the Molten Borough one.
Okay.
But for financial reasons, that didn't work.
Okay.
So, and I think those are municipal projects, so any municipal project would not necessarily be, under the RSAs, is not beholden to these ordinance revisions, so.
So we'll try to keep our questions as limited and let you finish. How's that?
No, because Heather's going to.
I just want to add one more thing, which is that, it's been a challenge because our ordinance was not written with considering solar.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons we came up with a new category and different recommendations for, conditional use permit or permitted by right was because what we had in there, we sort of said, okay, we'll call it a utility so that it can be permitted. But everything pertaining to utilities wasn't really appropriate for solar. So we came up with a new district and new recommendations that do make sense for solar. But with the way that we had it, just sort of by default, trying to make it work, it was in many ways much more permissive in everywhere than what we're proposing right now. And that's including the recommendations from the Energy Committee. A lot of the things that they've recommended are much more restrictive than what it was before, because you were just sort of allowed by default. The only thing that we're sort of, not the only thing, but one of the most significant things that this deals with is the lot coverage issue in the RO district. And that prompted, all of these changes. But in some other ways, what we're talking about now here is adding restrictions that we didn't have before, but that's very common for ordinances governing solar. So just wanted, and that with relative to your question about are we ahead or behind or whatever, it's.
Okay.
We're moving with the rest of the groups.
We'll let you continue now.
We did get a compliment from, I think it was Durham, somebody from their planning board, to say, oh, you did the public information sessions before you did the public hearing. That was a good idea. So we got a compliment. So this we just wanted to show as a graphic to show people what the existing lot coverage allows under the existing ordinance. And this is just for any structure, any impervious surface. But we want to drive home that it's not just about the impervious surface, it's about the aesthetics. And that's, I think, what's driving us thinking about this. It's not about the stormwater. Yes, it is, but we can deal with that. It has a lot to do with the visual impacts and the impacts to natural resources. So this is a proposed revision, and I'll have graphics after this, but these were recommendations that we had worked through with the Energy and Environment Committee and then amongst staff as far as changing what the percentage of solar land coverage. And I'll show you the next slide of what we mean by solar land coverage. So this doesn't really mean too much to you right now, but it's there. So again, I'll just focus on the RO and the RM districts. This is what you would see with the current setbacks in the RO and the RM, and what the current maximum lot coverage is. And this is a cross-section. Those are the panels, and this is sort of a standard. Every installation is going to be different, but this is sort of a standard cross-section that you could potentially see which is the cross-section of the panel is 9 feet, and then there's 25 feet of open space, whether it's a road or a grass strip or gravel, depends on what the development is. What we are considering to be, or what staff is recommending that we use for solar land coverage definition is the occupied area, so which is the footprint of the whole development. So it'd be from that panel to panel. The Energy and Environment Committee is recommending that we just consider that 9 feet of what the panel falls as solar land coverage. So that'll kind of keep that in your mind as we move forward and look at the graphics of what that would mean with those percentages that we're proposing.
So go back to that, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So total occupied area, staff recommends, is the 25 feet, 9 feet, 9 feet, 25 feet, 9 feet. That's
Altogether, yes.
altogether. And
Yes.
who is C?
That's the Energy and Environment
So
Committee.
the Energy and Environment Committee is recommending just the 9 feet, 9 feet, 9 feet?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So this is those same lots with the proposed new setbacks and using the occupied area calculations. So for commercial solar, 40%, and that's sort of what that would look like. Oh, sorry, it's not on.
It was working.
It wasn't on, sorry.
Oh.
So that would show what 40% using that 9-foot, 25-foot cross-section, that's what it would look like. I mean, this is a very non-typical lot that we would see, but this is just sort of to graphically represent what would take up those areas. That would be using that 1 megawatt per 5 acres. That would be about a 5 megawatt facility. This is using a 60-acre parcel. Just for easy round numbers, I chose 60 acres. Using the community solar, which would be a larger allowance because it is helping us meet community goals. That's what it would look like. And then this final one over here shows what, using the standard that the Energy and Environment Committee is proposing, only counting the solar panel, sort of the footprint per se at the 9 feet, that would be about a 10 megawatt facility. And actually, that would not even meet the 40% max. That would only be about 25% of lot coverage, but it would almost take up that entire parcel.
So you're looking at me like I'm looking at you, and I have
making
a
a
question.
face.
Can you back up for a second on the slide? Can you go back one? So I'm thinking about this in that 60-acre lot, and in a perfect world, in a football field or at a facility, it's perfectly flat and everything's good. You've got ledge, you've got wet areas, you've got depressions that you don't want to go in and fill.
Right.
The logic of taking the space between there, so in that case, the 25 feet might increase to 40 or 50 feet because you're hopping over a section because there's some ledge there that you don't want to blow out or something like that. How do you handle that?
Did Heather prep you for that question?
No, I did not.
Seriously?
I forgot to, well, that was something I forgot to mention. We would consider a certain distance, once they were separated by a certain amount of distance, those would be 2 separate footprint areas.
Okay.
So we wouldn't include that 50 feet within
Got it.
that lot
Especially if it's a
coverage.
natural thing that you
Yeah,
can't,
right.
like a
Yeah.
bluff or
Or
something like that.
going through, an access road or something.
Right, or wetlands that we don't want you to develop, that would not be considered as part of that lot
All right.
coverage.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if you mentioned this and I just missed it. Why 25 feet?
I think that it's the standard, I think, for accounting for shade and the angle of the shadow. Do you know why
To
it's 25?
avoid the panels shading the panels behind them for when the sun goes down.
Oh,
You have that
okay.
25 feet, so.
Why is the energy, why is the CEEC recommending less, if I understand?
No, we're just using this as an example of like an industry standard of a flat site.
Okay.
This is what you would expect
All right.
the cross-section to be. They're only recommending that you count each one of these as your solar land coverage and not, because the 25 feet
Oh, and exclude that?
exclude that
Yes, okay.
from your lot coverage
Thank you, I'm
requirement.
I'd love to know why does staff recommend that, why are you recommending that that the 25 feet in in the example is considered lot coverage? I mean, it's getting shaded, I get that, I guess. You can't have trees developed around, growing through it, I get all that.
It's the difference between all of this. So we're looking at it as an occupied area. If a large installation requires a fence around it, so that area is now cut off from wildlife movement. If you're looking at any other development that we're having in the RO or the RM district, it's going to be a compact development, even a cluster development. You can sort of anticipate what those clusters of lot coverage are going to be.
Okay.
So looking at this, we wanted to look at the entire footprint of the area. There'll be roads running through there. So we just want to, it's kind of just putting a number to it is pretty much what it is. So we could say, use the Energy and Environment Committee's proposal to only count the panels, which is actually currently how the ordinance is interpreted. So anybody coming right today before this ordinance is adopted, they're going to be using that lot coverage of just the panels themselves, which is the proposal of the Energy and Environment Committee.
Did you have one?
Yeah, I just wanted to, so this, we're not talking about lot coverage right now. We're talking about a new thing that doesn't exist in our ordinance, which is solar land coverage. Because lot coverage is a number that talks about impervious surfaces and stormwater drainage and all those things. We're not necessarily concerned with stormwater and all those things. We're concerned with what does this look like and what's the impact going to be in the character of the community. So that number of, if you just count that 9 number, and if I said to you, okay, it's 9, and we're going to allow, if I said to you, we're only going to count the panel, and I think the brochure example is a good one. Do you have that?
I do,
That
yep.
slide? Because if you look at the proposal that they had for that brochure property, if you only count the panel, it was something like,
I'll bring up
Yeah.
the slide.
so this is, if you only count the 9-foot panel, this, which covers, really is impacting pretty much almost the entire
That
site.
yellow line is the property
Yeah, that's the property
perimeter.
line. This right here is considered 27%. That's a very small number. If I say to you, you're allowed 27%, you wouldn't think that means that. So if you count the occupied area, as in if you outline this, and you only count these areas,
okay.
that is 62.5%. So by using solar land coverage, what we're trying to do is communicate most effectively with the community what the actual impact on the site is going to be. Because as far as we're concerned, this is really a 62.5% impact. Not
Visual impact.
Visual impact, and impact in terms of resources impacted. So we can't control whether or not somebody's going to clear a property. If you've got 40 acres of wooded property, and your natural resource goal from your master plan says that the purpose of that is to maintain the resource, by talking about land coverage, or by talking about solar land coverage, what we're saying is, you can impact in the RO district 40% of that, of the trees, of that.
Yeah.
We're trying to minimize the amount of impact. So there's the resource protection aspect of it, there's the aesthetic aspect of it, and then there's the impervious surface, which is really the least of it. It's a complete, because obviously, as everyone's pointed out repeatedly, rainwater falls off them and then it goes into the ground. So I hope that's helped to clarify. Can you go back to the other? So just again, this is showing 60 acres, okay? And of this 60 acres, if you do the standard 9 feet, 25 feet, 9 feet, 25 feet, this is what it would look, this would be 25%
Yes.
coverage if you just count the 9 feet. So it doesn't really matter how we measure what we're allowing. It just, in my opinion, what's most important is that we're communicating clearly and that people understand what the numbers mean. So we're saying 40%, this is a 60-acre lot. And so under staff's recommendation to count the area of impact, this is what that would look like. 40% actually looks like 40% of of the amount of land that would be impacted by the development. So do we think that this should be up here in the RO district? Do we think it should be down here? We can measure it however we like, but really what this picture looks like is what you need to think about.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, very.
Carol?
Well, on the 50%, it looks like more than 50% to me, unless there's
It
an
does look like
optical
more than
illusion
50%.
there.
It may just be
An illusion?
an illusion, because it's 50% of the total lot, and with setbacks, it looks like it squishes it a little bit and makes it longer.
Okay. It's the setbacks.
Oh, that's, no. So, we could choose to just measure the 9 feet, but then the recommendation wouldn't be 40%. It would be
5%,
5%.
or what, that's just a made-up number.
Chart to say what it's 9, it's really 20, it's not 27, it's really
Right,
40.
and if you said you can get 5% coverage, everyone would say, what are you, that's crazy, what is City of Concord, you're so restrictive, not realizing 5% actually looks like that.
It might make sense to kind of have an either or. Because if there was a challenging site that had outcrops and wetlands and stuff where you had a bunch of different patches, so to speak.
Each
it might be
patch
each-
Would be counted
its own
separately.
thing. So you wouldn't be penalized in, you know what I'm saying?
But its own thing being,
The outline of that particular patch.
Makes sense.
All right, Beth, continue on.
Carol is so deep in thought, I don't want
Continue on.
to interrupt her.
it might be helpful at some point to just have an illustration of a multi-patch installation, just so we can envision how that would be calculated. So I'm having a
Sure,
little
I mean, this
trouble.
kind of could be a good example of how we don't count this whole area that is in the middle there, because that's a large enough
Right.
area. So the occupied area would not be a straight shot from
Right.
here, it would just follow that,
Right.
as that.
So would there be 3 areas there with the space in the middle?
That's a road, so that's counted as part of the lot coverage, so that would be within it itself.
So in terms of our recommendation, this is in the RO, correct?
This is the RO, yes.
And so this is 62.5%. We've recommended in the RO 40%. So this would not be permitted as presented under our current recommendations. So if you imagine, say, this being maybe 30, 40% and this being 20%.
So you'd have to take
But-
off that whole top block.
Exactly. It would be something more like, I mean, I don't know exactly.
Probably
what-
more, yeah,
But it would be something like, a little bit, maybe something like this. So when you're thinking about what is acceptable and appropriate, that's maybe a good way to, I don't know if the people who are in favor of this or opposed to this would say, oh, well, that's okay if it's, or you know what I'm saying? These are the questions we need to answer.
So, in other words, if you just use those numbers there, could we say that 28% of the ground coverage equates to 62.5% of the visual coverage?
Correct.
Of the lot?
But we couldn't always say that because it's different. If it's on a certain slope, the panels could be closer together, so you don't have that 9-foot, 25-foot cross-section. So it's going to be, that occupied area is going to change based on what that cross-section looks like.
But we will know what it is as the plans take place, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And what she just said is also one of the reasons why we are not intending
On a slope.
to regulate based on amount of energy generated, because as the land changes, as the technology changes, you might be able to fit a different amount of energy on the same amount of space, and we don't want to arbitrarily restrict
Needs to be
how much energy
technology
you can
agnostic.
make. Right.
Carol?
How have other communities in your grand survey handled this issue?
They have looked at it, some communities, so this says the original proposed amendment, they have since sort of changed their, this is since the beginning, where it was only looking at the footprint of the panels, like that went right into the ground, so it wasn't the panel itself, it was just the,
Just the
it's getting
pole?
too late, I can't
The
think of
footing.
words, the footing.
Jeez.
It's just the footing plus the roads. So that 2.5%, that whole entire, that would, under those, so some municipalities use that as their lot coverage. Some restrict it by size. So I think Peterborough restricts it by size, so no more than 1 megawatt. So it's different across the board. All right, this is towards the end. So this was the map that we put together. We got information from Unitil of where three-phase power is, which is a requirement to make something economically feasible. They have to put a lot more investment into infrastructure if they're going to be more than a quarter of a mile away from three-phase power. So these are parcels within a quarter mile of the three-phase power, and then you can see, I know it's difficult for you all to see, but this is sort of, we're just looking at different sizes of sort of the pinkish red are state properties, the bluish colors are city-owned parcels, and then in the green is private-owned parcels. So we could start to see where some of these larger installations would go. And the smallest would support a 1 megawatt facility up to over 50 acres, which may be over a 10 megawatt facility. So that just kind of gives you an idea of predictability of where these larger developments may go in the city. And that's a discussion we can have later on when we start to look more specifically at lots. There was a recommendation to pick some of those lots and kind of apply that same graphic representation of what it could look like to apply these different lot coverage requirements that we're looking at. So that's where we're at.
Can you go back to the slide that shows, after we've explained what solar land coverage is, can you go back to the slide that shows what we were proposing? So we sat down and talked pretty extensively about these recommendations, and I just wanted to point out, so commercial solar here basically refers to solar that's not accessory to your house, so any commercial where you're intending to sell back to the grid and make money, not as net metering, but as a commercial enterprise. Basically any solar, any size, that's what that category covers. Community solar is what we discussed when someone locally within the community is who is receiving the power. So you'll notice that the community solar recommendations are much higher, or they're higher than the commercial solar recommendations because we're trying to encourage community solar. So in the RO and RM districts, those numbers are roughly twice what the existing lot coverage numbers are for buildings and structures. For the other districts, for instance, the institutional, we basically kept it the same. So if you're allowed 85% coverage in the institutional district for a parking lot or whatever, you're allowed 85% solar land coverage. Essentially, it would cover the same amount of land. If you take away like the buffers, that's almost kind of all you can fit anyways in an institutional parcel. Industrial, so I meant to say. So the institutional, I think, again, is the same as the lot coverage in the ordinance. The general commercial and the highway commercial, those numbers are, I believe, much higher than what the ordinance allows for lot coverage.
Yes.
Because the ordinance is assuming that general commercial and highway commercial is sort of like this suburban sort of development. So we're recommending, if you have a general commercial or highway commercial, that you could maximize that parcel for solar. In the gateway performance and the office park performance, it's less because of the nature of those parcels. We don't necessarily want to be incentivizing people to use those parcels for solar. We said that no ground-mounted solar for commercial purposes should be allowed in the central business opportunity corridor or the civic performance districts, because those are lots that we want to use for commercial or development. We don't want ground-mounted solar arrays, and it's probably unlikely that they would occur there anyway.
But they could do like carports. Those would be considered structures. So you could still have carports and roof-mounted within those districts.
So all of those residential districts, we basically said that no residential parcel in any of those districts or the neighborhood commercial, urban commercial, or the urban transitional, which are basically all the little tiny mixed-use parcels in the city, none of those should be used for commercial solar. Like, no property owner should say, hey, I'm going to buy this parcel, and then I just want to put solar here and sell it back to the grid. In the unlikely event that anyone would ever do that, we're saying that shouldn't happen. But if a community or a few houses got together under community solar and they decided, we want to maximize this parcel for solar for our neighborhood in the middle of downtown Concord, we're allowing 70%. So that essentially means that if you you allow your buffers, then the remainder of that parcel could be a ground-mounted solar array within any of those neighborhoods for community solar.
And I don't know if this property is in the RS district. I don't know exactly where it is, but say the Ruddy house that just got ripped down on Center Street. So that greenhouse that was just ripped down on Center Street, there's no plans for a new development on that house. If the lot is empty and they wanted to put a community solar, is that say it's in the RS district? I don't know where it is, but they could conceivably put a solar array.
Oh, I think that's one of the performance districts.
Okay, but if it wasn't, just humor me.
Humor you.
So, humor me. So it's right there, very visible, and there's no building on the property now. If they had 3 property owners that got together and said, we want to use that property for solar, they could do that.
Some may argue that that's sort of a very visible location next to the State House and City Hall, that it's a good statement for the city to make. So that's an argument that you could make, that
Perfect,
it
yep.
being there,
Yep.
that we're allowing that.
And other people would look at it and say, oh my gosh, no, it can't be, it's got to be a brick house.
But-
I'm
based
just
on
playing the
the-
devil's advocate.
Okay, no,
And I know
we-
there's buffers and all that, and there's going to be all the buffer issues, and I
Heard
know.
it all, Rich.
But-
No, but you're making a point, that's a very visible location.
yeah.
But that would not be permitted in that location, because we would not zone that. I mean, I believe that is either zoned in a performance district, or it's urban transitional, or it's not in a zone. So if you go back a few blocks where you do have one of those
Yeah.
zones, you would be able to
So
do
Warren
it.
Street or someplace else.
Right. right.
Heavy residential development and a building's taken down.
Yeah, but that's our way of saying, we do support and try to encourage the community to generate its own energy for its own use.
So it brings me back to the question of the board having the ability to increase those buffers. And if we didn't want it, if somebody didn't want it, and
Well, it gives the opportunity for the public to speak. So it is part of a public hearing. So then you have the opportunity to hear from abutters, to get the feedback of someone that's going to be looking out their front door and seeing that every day.
Yeah.
There is the flexibility to allow that. I mean, there's also, these are maximum coverage. It's all within your ability to reduce that maximum coverage if you don't believe it's appropriate for that site. I just want to also mention that the way that we've structured this, it's incentivizing the development on brownfields and marginal sites. So that's why we have lower lot coverages in the RM district. Is we've heard a lot of feedback that people think, yeah, go for building. We have a lot of building tops, and that is not restricted by any of these proposals. Parking lots are not restricted to have carports or anything within the parking lots, but it could on like a gravel site or any other brownfield sites. They'd have incentive to have larger developments on those properties, so maybe it could financially work out to develop those marginal sites for this.
And in no circumstances is it over 25 acres. That little note's for all those, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Which was, we came up with that number based on looking at the size of parcels that we have that are existing, and there are not many, but there are a few that would, based on our recommendations, allow like even, especially if you merged lots.
Yeah.
And do we think that a 40-acre or 50-acre installation would be appropriate in Concord if you could fit that on there with our recommendations?
Right.
We thought that it probably wasn't.
Okay. Can I ask a question from way back before? So if I remember right, when I was at the meeting, they mentioned decommissioning and they mentioned the bonding process for decommissioning. They gave a 20-year life cycle for a brand new installation. So the Unitarian Church installation that we did 2 years ago has got 18 years left as far as the full life expectancy of it, and then it's taken out?
It depends on what their lease agreements are. I mean, if the technology is still, I think it has to do with, in 20 years, the efficiency of that is going to be maybe not even financially.
So they may still leave the
feasible.
poles and they just change them to a different head or a different
Correct.
different panel. What's the bonding process? And we don't do, are they bonding the city? Are we getting a bond on that?
We haven't figured that part out yet. We have legal working on that.
Okay, so legal would work on it similar to the way we do bonds now with other
For site
requirements
stabilization
for
or
site
anything,
stabilization
yep.
and 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Correct. Yep. Because there's some recommendations, don't force the bonding.
I gotta tell you,
until, like,
I don't envy you guys. I imagine this has been a process and a half.
Steph has done an awesome.
Yeah, this is great.
lost
I mean,
a
this
lot of
is-
sleep.
But again, we keep throwing the barbs at you and you keep answering them with the question or, I mean, that's great. You done?
I'm done.
Okay, so questions? Matt?
Yeah, I have a lot, but I don't, yeah. Some of it has to do with aesthetic questions, so aesthetics, some of that's what you're talking about, the view. I'm thinking of how that evolves over time. Thinking of driving across Oklahoma and Texas, and there are more windmills than I've ever seen in my life. But it's generating a lot of power it's reducing people's utility bills, and so, hey, this is great to look at because it's saving me money. So I'm thinking in the future, reduced energy, costs for homeowners or businesses, they may like more panels. And so then using your coverage may limit the number, which may make it harder to get more solar. Some just thoughts there. I don't need an answer, those are things that are going through my head.
So, I mean, we have thought about that. One of the things that we're looking into is municipal aggregation, which the city would almost essentially become the utility where people would buy the energy through the city. That hasn't been established yet, so we may consider changing this once, because right now, any large-scale development is being sold to Massachusetts or Connecticut, and our community is not benefiting it beyond the tax base. So I think the way we're looking at it right now, where we stand today, maybe we don't want to incentivize a 40-acre development, because in 5 years, if we can have a municipal aggregation and then have that development, and then it's going to benefit with everybody within the city, we don't want to give up that opportunity right now. So that's sort of how we're looking at it, that it'll evolve as
Right.
other systems evolve.
And as
in the city.
technology increases and solar panels may become more efficient, be able to produce more energy, maybe even fewer solar panels to get more energy. Yeah, it's evolving.
Yeah, it's constantly, I mean, even the proposal from 2 or 3 years ago at Hall Street, technology has changed a lot, and that development, as we're proposing it in the next year, is going to be completely different than what was proposed 2-3 years ago, so.
You all set, Matt?
I'm all set.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a comment. I mean, I think at first blush, it looks like staff has really, kind of created a nice balance here between our interests, both the interest to be perceived as a community that's trying to become more energy efficient, trying to become less carbon-based dependent, but at the same time trying to make very judicious choices about density that helps us to also maintain the open space that really is a hallmark of Concord, and which is another reason that people come and want to live here. I think it's important for us to make these balanced decisions because honestly, there are people who are going to come and live here because of our open space. There are also people who are going to come here and live here because of our commitment to becoming, a carbon neutral community. So again, first blush, I think you guys have done a very nice job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, certainly. Thank you for the comments. Other comments or questions? No? Nope. Last chance? You'll have another look at it.
I know, it's not the last chance.
Have another look
Yeah,
at
we
it.
really, the purpose of this was just to let you know about the issues, give you the proposal that we have now.
Yep.
Please look at it, give us
Yep.
feedback if you have any, or questions if you have any, or save them. Are we shooting for January for a public hearing?
I think we have to circle back with the Energy and Environment Committee.
Okay. So
See where we're at
January or
with them.
February, maybe, depending on,
And then we'll
how this
address this in its entirety?
Yes,
Okay.
correct. Yeah, legal still has to go through
Yeah.
it, so that's another process we have to go through. They haven't completely
Okay.
flushed through this yet.
Go.
So since this was just put in front of us
Yes.
tonight, I really haven't had a chance to look at it, but for commercial, is the natural vegetation pollinator a requirement?
That would be a requirement, yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
Great.
And
When you were talking about that, I was thinking about the development that we had that was, I think, in East Concord, where we had the people who were in the neighborhood who were, bemoaning the loss of the bee habitat, yeah. And so it was very nice to see that that's going to be part of this plan.
yeah. I'm going to push to get grazing animals that the city can own and we can have.
Are you going to be a wrangler? You're gonna-
I am. I'm going to become a shepherd and have our sheep that takes care of all of those, so we can take that.
Let's just not have a range war between the sheep people and the beef people.
You're right, okay.
Okay, Beth, thank you very much. Okay, so that really ends our public session. We do want to stay.
Your work session.
Work session, sorry. Our work session, will address it in a public session next month. It ends our public agenda, but we do have a tablet policy that we want to go over with the board, and we want to, since we're going to be meeting, we want to keep it in the public space. So before us is going to be, you're going to have we'll get more comments, so pass those down if you could.
want me to just tell everybody what's
Yeah.
So since it's Christmas,
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Everybody got them?
planning.
Everybody should have them. I made
Planning-
11.
No, we need more.
They're coming.
They're coming.
Everybody get one too? More. Yes, I'm sorry.
So,
More
Everybody should
coming?
have one.
So everybody should have one.
I'm not sure I want one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You don't have to, as an alternate, you don't have to have one.
I mean, it just, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
For one every now and then, that's fine.
so let me just, what's going on here? So we were able to arrange it so that you can take your iPads home, and you can do that today. We have this policy for you to sign. If there's anyone who feels uncomfortable, that's fine. You don't have to do it, and we'll, in the event that you are attending a meeting, we'll bring them for you. Make sure you tell us if you're coming to a meeting, so, because we won't be, trucking them all around anymore. The policy basically just says that you're responsible for the tablet, and if anything happens to it, it's similar to what council signed when they got their tablets. I will tell you that these are public property, so while there is an option to link your personal Gmail to these, we don't recommend that, because anything that is on here or has access from here is public. So don't do that. We recommend not doing that. Don't put anything, personal photos or things like that on here, just purely because these are public record. But, so you have access to the internet, you have access to, everything that's on there. And if you sign these, please sign these now, and and send them back to us, and we'll keep those for our records.
So just anecdotally, and I know this just because I've been playing with it, the Granicus system, when you look at it, if you get the email from Lisa that says, here's the agenda for next month, you can open it up in Granicus, you can go through the PDFs, you can write notes to yourself, you can highlight items, the notes in particular are attached to the item on your agenda. So if you look at the agenda items, I've got the little yellow pieces here that I wrote questions about specific things, and it pops up on your agenda. So now you'll see the agenda item, and then you'll have all your notes specific to that agenda item. It's very handy. And when you're looking at ADR notes or things like that from the minutes, you can make yourself notes, and they'll pop up in the agenda when you open it up and look at it.
And I use it that way all the time.
You do it, yeah.
So those notes that you write to yourself are also public record?
Those notes that you write to yourself are public record. So you want to keep them very benign and say, what does this mean? Question this, question this, question this. Not, they're public in that sense. They're not going anywhere. They're not posted as part of anything other than just the agenda itself. And they're your notes that stay on your file.
Which is not to say that anyone else will be able to access them. It's just if the city takes your iPad back, that they, or if there's a right-to-know request.
Right.
So not related to this, just FYI, there is a conflict of interest flyer that Lisa brought us back from a workshop she attended. We just want, just as a
FYI.
informational, educational, we're just handing it out for sort of a continuing education
So
piece.
not, and just for you guys that are going to take them tonight, that's fine. If you want to take this with you, take a look at it, have your attorney look at it, whatever you want to do. If you don't want to sign it, leave the iPad and then come back next month, and you can, if you want to take it, you
Yeah.
can bring it back signed next month, so. Okay, so you don't have to look at that right now, but if we're good with that, what we'll do
Well,
is.
if people want to take them home, they do need to sign.
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
them signed
you do have to do
tonight.
that. I meant, we've done everything in the public space, so I want to see if there's any other business and then close the meeting. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think I had one other thing about the tablets, but now I.
Nothing on the tablet? Well, we can hit it if you remember what it is. So let's, no other business has come before, so are we good to adjourn?
Yes.
Okay, if we'll take a motion to adjourn, if someone would like to make that motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and roundly seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your help and assistance, and we will see you in January.